Welcome to Gulf Chats, where stories of the Gulf come alive. From daring voyages to the dynamic history that shaped our coastal world, we bring you first-hand accounts, expert insights, and the timeless tales of sailors, explorers, and maritime pioneers. Welcome aboard.
Thank y'all for coming. I really appreciate it. This is really exciting for me to be doing. I'm not necessarily a public speaker. All of my words are typically written and edited and rewritten several times, so we're going to see how this goes, and I'm very excited. To start off, I do want to say that I have some really great resources where I pulled all this information from, like historians like John Sledge and Tom McGee, and then others, along with archives and all, like so many places where I pulled information. So I do want to kind of give credit where credit's due. And a lot of this information is also from a book called The Story of Alabama in 14 Foods. It's by Amelia, and she's local. She's really great. So if this part interests you, there's other foods and connections to the area and why we enjoy those foods. So you should definitely check that out. But yeah, so I work for Mobile Bay Magazine. I have been working there since 2002. Not correct, 2022. And I write history articles, food articles, lifestyle content, and profiles. And so, like Yara mentioned, there is a part in the magazine called In Piece. And if you're not familiar with that, we basically take a photo from one of the local archives. Around here, it's a historic photo. It can range really any time that would be considered historic. So it can really be back to like the pre-20th century. And so we take those photos and we end up, it's like take the photo and research anything you can learn about it. And sometimes we know what the photo is. Other times we're like, I don't know, this is an interesting photo. Let's look and see what this photo is about. And so I've been heading that since I was hired, which was very intimidating to me at first. So I was like, you get one thing wrong, you rewrite history, and that's not what I'm trying to do. But I really, really love doing that. And so in November 2023, I wrote an in-piece about unloading bananas at the banana docks in Mobile. And then flash forward to 2025, AL.com picked it up, and then John Sledge was putting together this panel for this year on the Gulf Chats, and he asked me to do an article or a Gulf chat on bananas. And I was like, okay, I wrote about it once, like let's give a talk about it. So thank you all for coming. All right, so to set the scene, this is the photo that I wrote about. And so to set the scene, in 1890, Mobile was in a long economic depression thanks to the Civil War. And a big reason for this is that cotton collapsed. So Mobile was a huge cotton exporter, and that's really what funded a lot of the city's resources. And so since that collapsed for a variety of reasons, Mobile was kind of looking at how are we gonna make money? And so in 1830, Alabama exported goods, cotton. They were valued at $2.2 million through the port of Mobile. And so their export wasn't working, so Mobile turned to imports, which happened at the port to diversify the economy. They didn't want to just rely on cotton anymore because it wasn't as stable. And they also wanted to use the existing harbor infrastructure that was not being used on the cotton off-season, and then it wasn't being as utilized since cotton exports were not as high as they had been. And so they decided, okay, let's try something else. Let's try bananas. And so the banana import actually was sort of a PR move as well for Mobile. It was economically motivated, but it was also kind of a facelift for the city because Mobile used to have this amazing reputation. It was like being compared to Charleston and other like really great southern cities. But at this time of the economic downturn, its reputation was kind of tarnished. It was becoming known for drinking and gambling and prostitution. It was kind of the Wild West. And so they're like, we don't want our city to look like that anymore. Let's try to amp up its reputation while also getting more money and rebranding the city. And so to jumpstart this movement, the Mobile Chamber of Commerce offered $1,500 to the first company that would operate regular fruit ships from Central America to Mobile for 1 year. So they kind of tried to incentivize somebody take this up and do it, and we'll see how it works for a year. And so the first banana shipment pulled into Mobile Bay in 1893 on the ship Sala, and it was co-signed for by the Mobile Fruit and Trading Company. And this was honestly the perfect time for bananas to come in. It was right before bananas became really popular in America. They were first introduced in America at the 1876 World's Fair in Philadelphia. That fair celebrated 100 years of independence from Great Britain, and to put things in perspective, bananas were being exhibited, but so were things like Alexander Graham Bell's telephone and the Statue of Liberty's right arm with the torch that hadn't been placed on the statue yet. And so bananas were kind of among these exotic things that America wasn't used to. And so their popularity was due to them being exotic. People thought of the tropics, it reminded them of vacations, and it reminded them of kind of the warm weather and kind of the life that they were looking for, especially after the war and after this economic downturn. They wanted to escape. It was a sense of joy, a sense of escape. It was fun. And so bananas became kind of the new craze with Americans. And actually the fruit became so popular, and this was a fact that I learned when I was researching this end piece. I don't know that I ran it, but I wanted to. At the time in 1896, Teddy Roosevelt, who was the president then of the New York Police Department, and then he would go on to be president, he declared a war on banana peels. Apparently the fruit had gotten so popular that the city streets were kind of littered with banana peels, and people were getting injured, and he wanted to clean the streets. So there was a newspaper that reported on his war on banana peels. And so back in Mobile, the Schneider Banana Company soon entered the trade, and that kind of cemented Central American bananas as Mobile's first regular commercial import. All right, so in the early 1900s, Mobile ended up being the third largest importer in the United States on bananas. They came right behind New York and New Orleans. And so Mobile did import other things, but it maintained this national reputation for being a banana port, and it got that reputation pretty quickly. So in 1900, there were 15 million bunches of bananas passed through U.S. ports, and 10 years later, 15 million turned to 40 million through U.S. ports. And at that time, the United Fruit Company, they docked their boats, which they coined the Great White Fleets. They were white, and you could see them coming from a mile away. They docked them at the Banana Docks, which was a large open-air market, like I think it was like 4 city blocks like that way, kind of where the convention center is now. It gave a dedicated place for fruit and vegetables in Mobile to be shipped out and brought in. And so kids actually used to come by those docks after school. They would watch the workers, and then they'd maybe grab a banana that was unattended and then go home. And so you can see in this article, it's on this slide, it's saying that there was a record fruit shipment from Mobile, and then you can see the workers at the banana docks. And in this one, these are the scenes that you would see at the banana docks, workers loading, unloading, picking up bananas and everything. They sorted them, they weighed them, they counted bananas. And at first they did this purely by hand. There was no machinery, but as you can see in this left slide, that United Fruit in 1903 got conveyor belts, which lightened the load a little bit, but it was still backbreaking work. The bunches, basically, I think they weigh like 40 to 80 pounds each, and so you're hauling these around all day, every day, and so the workers definitely were, putting in the work. So the bananas were loaded into refrigerated cars to be transported up north, and workers would get to the docks, and there would be a chalkboard sign that said the name of the ship that would be coming in, what it was carrying, and what time it would be coming in, so that they knew, okay, today we're working on a banana ship, or we're working on a different import. And so many workers lived in the adjacent Down the Bay neighborhood, and many of them were Black migrants. They were responsible, again, for unloading, counting, and sorting bananas. So once the bananas were taken off the ship to a train, the train would then travel north with bananas, and then they returned south with grapes and apples that we couldn't get here. And so that's kind of why, or how produce became available more nationwide and more easily. And so before 1910, bananas were a novelty. Like I said, they were exotic and people wanted them. It's almost like, things become a trend when you want something that seems unattainable, then all of a sudden everybody has them. But bananas were expensive, and so they were a luxury. They cost about a dime each, and they actually at the time were eaten in foil, and you had a knife and a fork. And but by 1915, they were cheaper and more widely available. And once they became popular, United Fruit Company took advantage of the situation, and they created marketing programs, educational materials, and things to encourage everyone to eat more bananas, saying that they were healthy and that they were convenient. They were really convenient because they came in a peel and you didn't have to get your hands messy. So they ended up taking the craze and turning it into here's why you should buy more bananas from us, which is very smart. And so when the fruit became more affordable and available, more cookbooks began incorporating them into recipes. You're not going to cook something that has an ingredient that you can't get more easily. So bananas became more called for in recipes, and since pudding was already a part of Southern palate and identity, they just decided why not add bananas. And so people would be making banana pudding a lot during the early 1900s. And they often served it with whatever kind of thing that they had on hand, like stale bread, leftover cake, biscuits, and kind of making a trifle. And more affluent people used vanilla wafers to serve with their banana pudding. And so in 1915, Mobile leaders, they obtained $3 million in federal funds for harbor improvements that that were implemented into the 1920s, which allowed for the increased importation of bananas. So business was already doing really well, but it only increased from there. But things were going along until the war. And so by the 1940s, the banana import suffered as the port shifted to importing more wartime necessities like metal and everything. But banana imports actually rose again after the war. All right, so I do want to pause here and talk about somebody who was really influential with the banana trade. He started out in Mobile, but he became globally recognized for his role in the banana industry. So he's known as Sam the Banana Man. His name was Sam Zimlich, and he was born in Russia in the late 1870s. And about 16 years later, he came to New York and then traveled on to Selma, where he had a relative who operated a small grocery. And he actually ended up seeing his first banana in 1893, and he knew that they were really popular, they were hard to come by, they were rare, so people wanted them. And he also knew about Mobile's banana business, so he decided, let's head on down to Mobile and see what I can do with this. And so he observed the banana docks workers, and he noticed that they would ignore the bananas that they deemed too ripe to be able to travel up north and last. They would honestly just rot on the train. And bananas only lasted a couple of days of travel. And if they had one spot, they were deemed turning. And then if they had two spots, they were deemed ripes. And workers would leave the ripes on the ground, hence the kids getting them. And they would spoil in transit, so there was no point in packing them up. And so for $150, Sam purchased enough of the ripe bananas to fill a boxcar of his own. And he spent the next 6 days selling bananas to people in nearby towns. And he didn't profit much at first, but he was determined and he knew it was going to catch on, so he kept doing it. So he saw his first banana in 1893. So 7 years later, he sold 20,000 bananas, and then 4 years after that, he sold 500,000 bananas. So it ended up catching on. And so after 10 years of selling bananas, he's like, okay, I want to make this bigger. And so he tapped Mobile fruit merchant Asheville Hubbard to form the Hubbard Zimlich Steamship Company. They started out with $30,000 in capital and kind of a beat-up ship to work with. But they were able to turn that into something profitable. And in 1910, he acquired the Coyamel Fruit Company, which had lost a lot of money. It was not doing very well, so it's kind of a steal. He was able to get it really cheaply, and he began acquiring land in Honduras. And so to prevent an increase on banana export costs in the early 1900s. He privately funded revolutionaries in Honduras who overthrew the government and installed a more pliable president that would make his business dealings more easy to do, such as not paying taxes. So he was making really ethical business decisions early on. And so in January of 1914, Zimlich located the Coyamel Fruits headquarters to New Orleans. And this move cost Alabama's port an estimated $200,000 a year, which I'm sure they were not very happy about since he did get his start in Mobile. And after that, less than 1/3 of the company's banana imports came through Mobile. So by 1929, he oversaw 14% of the American banana trade, not the Alabama banana trade, the American, so 14% of that. His company's stock price rose from $63 to $107 that year. And by November of that year, a few weeks after the stock market crash, he sold Coyamel to United Fruit for an outright payment of 300,000 stock shares, and those were worth $31 million then, which was crazy. Today, that's about $420 million. So he sold, he retired, he was happy to live on his money and be fine. But then 3 years later, United Fruit's profits just tanked. They fell by 85%. So he installed himself as chairman, came back, and he did a little reorganization of his own company. He fired a quarter of United Fruit's executives, kind of overthrew their government again. And since the problems in the company largely fell to leadership, he got rid of about a quarter of those people. And so after he became chairman again, his stock doubled within 2 weeks of him coming back. And he led the company for the next 25 years. Can you imagine going into retirement and coming back to work another 25 years? I guess it all paid off because he died on one of the best homes in New Orleans in November of 1961. And so something I thought that was interesting about him is that he helped establish, thanks to his dealings in coups in Guatemala and Honduras, he established the term banana republic, basically that the economy and politics relied on one import, in this case banana imports, to such a degree that the bananas rise and their fall and any sort of change in the price or cost of bananas would determine the entire well-being of one country. So I had no clue that phrase had Mobile roots, but I thought that was very interesting. All right, so like I mentioned, in World War II, they were importing steel and things that the war needed. They were just importing all the necessities. Then once the war ended, banana imports rose again. They returned by 1953 to pre-war levels, and they increased every year after that until 10 years later it kind of hit the brakes a little bit. So in 1963, United Fruit Company was the main importer at the port of Mobile. Then they poured operations out of Mobile in 1963. And so that kind of started the beginning of the end, or the downturn of Mobile's once great banana imports. And so imports basically ceased by the mid to late 80s after Del Monte moved operations from Mobile to the Biloxi area in 1985. And that effectively ended banana imports in Mobile. And so the banana docks were still around, but since they weren't really being used the way they had been, they were cleared in the following years for the construction of the convention center. And one person did try to kind of keep the spirit of the banana docks alive by establishing the Banana Docks Cafe. They started it in that area. They did serve banana pudding on their menu, but it closed in 2010. And so that was basically the start to finish of the banana industry in Mobile. Thank y'all so much for coming. I really appreciate it.
Well, thank you.